García Ramírez, sometimes García IV, 7, called the Restorer, was Lord of Monzón and Logroño, and, from 1134, King of Navarre. He restored the independence of the Navarrese crown after 58 years of union with the Kingdom of Aragon. Early years. Garcia was born in the early 12th century. His father, Ramiro Sanchez of Monzón, was son of Sancho Garce, illegitimate son of Garcia Sanchez III of Navarre and half-brother of Sancho IV. His mother Cristina was the daughter of Rodrigo Diaz de Viva, better known as El Cid. Rise to power. In 1076, as a consequence of the murder of King Sancho IV by his siblings, Navarre had been united with Aragon. However, with the loss of the childless warrior King Alfonso the Battler in 1134, the succession fell into dispute. In his unusual will, Alfonso had left the combined kingdoms to 3 crusading orders, which effectively neutralized the papacy from exercising a role in selecting among the potential candidates. The nobility immediately rejected the will, with that of Aragon favoring Alfonso's younger brother Ramiro, a monk. The nobility of Navarre, skeptical of Ramiro having the necessary temperament to resist the incursions by the western neighbor, another claimant, King Alfonso VII of Leon and Castile, and perhaps chafing under the continued Aragonese hegemony, initially favored a different candidate, Pedro de Atare, a grandson of Alfonso's illegitimate uncle, Sancho Ramirez, Count of Ribagorza. A convocation of the bishops and nobility was convened at Pamplona to decide between Pedro and Ramiro, but were so alienated by Pedro's arrogance that they abandoned him in favor of a son of their own dynasty, García Ramírez, Lord of Monzón. Like Pedro, descended from an illegitimate brother of a former king, he was duly elected by the nobility and clergy of Navarre, while Ramiro was enthroned by that of Aragon and strongly opposed Garcia's election in Navarre. In light of this, the Bishop of Pamplona granted Garcia his church's treasure to fund his government against Ramiro's pretensions. Among Garcia's other early supporters were Los Penichones, Martinez de Light, and Count Latro, who carried out negotiations on the king's behalf with Ramiro. Eventually, however, in January 1135, with the Pact of Vadaluongo, the two monarchs reached a mutual accord of adoption. Garcia was deemed the son and Ramiro the father, in an attempt to maintain both the independence of each kingdom and a de facto supremacy of the Aragonese one. In May 1135, Garcia declared himself a vassal of Alfonso VII. This simultaneously put him under the protection and lordship of Castile and brought recognition of his royal status from Alfonso, who was a claimant to the Battler's succession. Garcia's submission to Castile has been seen as an act of protection for Navarre that had the consequence of putting her in an offensive alliance against Aragon and, now that Garcia had turned to Alfonso, forced Ramiro to marry and to produce an heir and to forge an alliance with Ramon Berenguer IV, Count of Barcelona. On the other hand, Garcia may have been responding to Ramiro's marriage, which proved beyond a doubt that the King of Aragon was seeking another heir than his distant relative and adopted son. Before September 1135, Alfonso VII granted Garcia Zaragoza as a fief, recently conquered from Aragon. This outpost of Castilian authority in the east was clearly beyond the military capacity of Alfonso to control and provided further reasons for recognition of Garcia in Navarre in return for not only his homage, but his holding Zaragoza on behalf of Castile. In 1136, Alfonso was forced to do homage for Zaragoza to Ramiro and to recognize him as King of Zaragoza. In 1137, Zaragoza was surrendered to Raymond Berenguer, though Alfonso retained suzerainty over it. By then, Garcia's reign in Zaragoza had closed. Garcia's heirs, sometime after 1130, but before his succession, Garcia married Margaret of Laguel. She was to bear him a son and successor, Sancho VI, as well as two daughters who each married kings. The elder, Blanche, born after 1133, was originally to marry Raymond Berengar IV, as confirmed by a peace treaty in 1149. In spite of the Count's existing betrothal to Petronilla of Aragon, but Garcia died before the marriage could be carried out. Instead she married Sancho III of Castile. The younger daughter, Margaret, married William I of Sicily. Garcia's relationship with his first queen was, however, shaky. She supposedly took on many lovers and showed favoritism to her French relatives. She bore a second son named Rodrigo, whom her husband refused to recognize as his own. On the 24th of June 1144, in Leon, Garcia married Urraca, called La Asturiana, illegitimate daughter of Alfonso VII, to strengthen his relationship with his overlord. In 1136, Garcia was obliged to surrender Rioja to Castile, but, in 1137, he allied with Alfonso I of Portugal and confronted Alfonso VII. They confirmed a peace between 1139 and 1140. He was thereafter an ally of Castile in the Reconquista and was instrumental in the conquest of Almeria in 1147. In 1146, he occupied Taust, which belonged to Aragon, and Alfonso VII intervened to mediate a peace between the two kingdoms. Garcia died on the 21st of November 1150 in Lorca, near Estella, and was buried in the Cathedral of Santa Maria la Real in Pamplona. He was succeeded by his eldest son. He left one daughter by Urraca, Sancha, who married successively Gaston Vivbiacutarn and Pedro Manrique de Lara. Garcia left, as the primary monument of his reign, the monastery of Santa Maria de la Oliva in Carcastello. It is a fine example of Romanesque architecture.